Today, Africa is a continent synonymous with underdevelopment and mass starvation. However, African countries were attempting to pave the way for a brighter future after decolonization. African history has witnessed numerous leaders meeting violent ends, especially through assassination. The unstable political climates are reflected in their deaths, typically the result of coups, political unrest, or ideological conflicts. These assassinations provide insights into the political challenges of post-colonial Africa. In this video, we look at why and how were the lives of African revolutionary leaders cut short. Number 1. Patrice Lumumba. One of the most infamous political assassinations in history is that of Patrice Lumumba. Born in Belgian Congo on July 2, 1925, Patrice Emery Lumumba became a prominent leader due to his dedication to the independence of his homeland. Founding the Congolese national movement, he became a key figure in the struggle against Belgian colonial rule in Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo gained independence from Belgium in June 1960, making Lumumba the first prime minister. His premiership faced national challenges from the very start, as the country lacked a seasoned administrative structure. This complicated the transition process. The nation's unity was further threatened by regional secessionist movements, particularly in the mineral-rich Katanga province. Lumumba's refusal to align completely with Western interests caused international tension during the Cold War. When the Soviet Union showed support in Congo, Westerners began fearing the spread of communism in Africa. Because of his refusal to compromise on foreign fronts and domestic policies, he was eventually dismissed by the President of Congo in September 1960. Lumumba contested this decision, thus began a power struggle. He was arrested in December 1960 by forces loyal to Army Chief of Staff Joseph Mobutu, who was supported by Belgian operatives and the American Central Intelligence Agency (CIA). On January 17, 1961, Lumumba was executed by a firing squad commanded by a Belgian officer in Katanga. Observers think his death was a political assassination aimed at removing a significant obstacle to Western and Belgian mining interests in the region. The assassination took place at a time when the country had fallen under 4 separate governments: the central government in Kinshasa, then Leopoldville, a rival central government by Lumumba's followers in Kisangani, then Stanleyville, and the secessionist regimes in the mineral-rich provinces of Katanga and South Kasai. Since Lumumba's physical elimination had removed what the West saw as the major threat to their interests in the Congo, internationally led efforts were undertaken to restore the authority of the moderate and pro-Western regime in Kinshasa over the entire country. These resulted in ending the Lumumbist regime in Kisangani in August 1961, the secession of South Kasai in September 1962, and the Katanga secession in January 1963. Considered a brilliant and fearless man, Belgium and America are said to have been involved in his assassination after his involvement with Russia. Congo was too rich, too big, and too important for the West to lose control as they would have had Lumumba lived. Number 2. Silanos Olympio. Silanos Olympio was born on September 6, 1902 in Lomé. This was part of the German colony of Togoland. Educated in London, he returned to Africa and became involved in the fight for independence of Togo from French colonial rule. It was a long and painful journey to independence for Togo, as Silanos Olympio was arrested several times by the French authorities. However, Silanos Olympio helped the country reach independence from France. Togo gained independence on April 27, 1960, and Olympio became its first president. As president, Olympio faced numerous challenges. The country was divided by colonial legacies, making it harder for him to unify the nation. His policies were aimed at economic and administrative independence from France. However, they did not sit well with all segments of Togolese society, especially the French Foreign Legion veterans who had been excluded from the new national military setup. This exclusion fueled resentment among groups who felt marginalized. The nation's discontent was only worsened by economic struggles. Heavily dependent on agricultural exports, Togo was unable to meet the developmental needs required. Olympio's government faced increasing pressure while it struggled to stabilize the growing unrest, exacerbated by economic problems. On January 13, 1963, a group of army veterans launched a coup. In the early hours, as the army attempted to gain control, Olympio sought refuge at the United States Embassy. However, he was denied entry and captured outside the embassy. Here, he was assassinated. His death was the first instance of an African head of state being overthrown in a coup. Number 3. Steve Biko. Bantu Stephen Biko was one of the greatest young leaders of South Africa who fought against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Born in 1946 to a poor family in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, Biko was the poster child of Black Consciousness Movement, a grassroots anti-apartheid campaign of the 1960s and 1970s. This also was the most dangerous time to oppose the monolithic edifice of white rule in South Africa. With its back increasingly against the wall, white South Africa responded to internal Black opposition with all of the insidious resources of a police state. Biko enjoyed the advantage of a well-funded education. While studying medicine, he joined the National Union of South African Students, a powerfully anti-apartheid movement. Universities at the time led the anti-apartheid movement, and it was not only Black students and activists who were involved. Despite its retrogressive government, a strong liberal movement infused academic and civil society, and Biko found himself in a fertile social environment to develop his ideas of Black consciousness. Biko, however, was distrustful even of well-meaning liberal whites, believing their interest in Black liberation in South Africa to be fundamentally paternalistic and patronizing. Biko's message was separate organization and separate institutions of liberation. His definition of Black included colored or people of mixed race and Indians, equally subject to the race restrictions of apartheid. Biko was frustrated that the National Union of South African Students and other anti-apartheid groups were dominated by white liberals rather than by the Blacks who were most affected by apartheid. He developed the view that to avoid white domination, Black people had to organize independently, and to this end, he became a leading figure in the creation of the South African Students Organization, SASO, and in 1969 he was elected as the first president of SASO, and in 1970 he was elected as the chair of SASO publication. Biko later became fully involved in the Black Community Programs BCP, which was an arm of the Black Consciousness Movement BCM. Soon enough, Biko was noticed by the authorities, and in 1973 he was the subject of a banning order. This restricted him to the vicinity of his hometown in the Eastern Cape, prohibited him from speaking either in public or to more than one person at a time, barred his membership of political organizations, and forbade the media from quoting him. He was now a person of interest to the authorities, and his every movement was monitored. In 1977, Biko broke the terms of his banning order by driving to Cape Town, and on the return journey, he and his companion were stopped at a roadblock and Biko was taken into custody. He was transported to a police station and there held naked and in shackles. He endured lengthy interrogation, handcuffed and chained naked to a grill, but details of precisely what happened have never been made public. During the interrogation, he was badly beaten and suffered 3 brain lesions that resulted in a massive brain hemorrhage. The police still kept him chained despite his condition and forced to stand in shackles. The police later said that Biko had attacked one of them with a chair, forcing them to subdue him and place him in handcuffs and leg irons. He was driven then to Pretoria, naked in the back of a police vehicle, and he died in a cell on September 12, 1977. He was 30 years old when he died, and he remains an icon of the South African liberation struggle. Number 4. Amilcar Cabral. A central figure in the fight for independence from Portuguese colonial rule was Amilcar Cabral, who was prominent in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, PIIGC, in 1956. His approach to liberation emphasized the importance of cultural identity, acknowledging the need for a combination of armed struggle with political education. Under Cabral's leadership, PIIGC conducted a prolonged guerrilla warfare campaign against the Portuguese, gradually taking control of large swathes of territory in Guinea-Bissau. He set up local governance structures in these territories, demonstrating effective control and governance that gained PIIGC recognition as the legitimate government of Guinea-Bissau by some countries before independence was officially declared. Cabral became a respected figure in the global anti-imperialist movement. However, his prominence and success also made him a target. On January 20, 1973, Cabral was assassinated in Conakry, Guinea, by members of his own party. This happened just months before Guinea-Bissau declared unilateral independence, Portugal denied any part in his death, but the man later arrested claimed to be working for the Portuguese government. His assassination was a significant blow to the PAIGC and the liberation movement in both Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. However, his ideological groundwork and the structures he put in place led to the independence of Guinea-Bissau in September 1973 and Cape Verde in 1975. Number 5. Samora Machel, a revolutionary and the first president of Mozambique. Samora Machel was born on September 29, 1933. He was trained as a nurse. However, his observations of racial injustices under Portuguese rule drove him to politics. He joined the Mozambique Liberation Front, Frelimo, in 1962. By 1970, he was leading the movement, all thanks to his charismatic persona and strategic mind. Frelimo launched a guerrilla war under Machel's leadership, fighting against the Portuguese colonial forces. He believed in political education and grassroots mobilization, strategies which helped him win the hearts of his people. His approach not only strengthened the resistance's base, but paved the way for politico-military engagement. Mozambique gained independence from Portugal on June 25, 1975, and Machel became the first president of the now independent country. Immediately, he was faced with the task of rebuilding a nation destroyed by colonial exploitation. His government implemented socialist policies and nationalized key industries. He focused on education and healthcare to uplift the poverty-stricken population. However, the Cold War era scarred Machel's presidency. Due to his socialist leanings and close ties with the Soviet Union and Cuba, Mozambique became a battleground for Cold War dynamics. This led to a prolonged civil war which was fueled by external support for opposition groups. This included the anti-communist rebel movement Renamo, which was supported by the then apartheid South Africa. On October 19, 1986, Samora Machel died in a plane crash under mysterious circumstances near the Mozambique-South Africa border. The official investigation by Mozambique and international parties blamed an error in navigation. This was attributed either to a faulty instrument or possible sabotage. However, allegations of assassination devised by the apartheid government in South Africa became the accepted explanation. Number 6. Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara is often called the Che Guevara of Africa. He was born on December 21, 1949, in Yako, French Upper Volta. As the result of a popular coup, Sankara came to power in 1983. He was deeply committed to the transformation of his country, renaming it Burkina Faso in 1984, which means the land of upright men. Sankara was the apparent opposite of everything we are often told that success should look like. As prime minister and later as president, Sankara rode a bicycle to work before he upgraded at his cabinet's insistence to a Renault 5, one of the cheapest cars available in Burkina Faso at the time. He lived in a small brick house and wore only cotton produced, weaved, and sewn in Burkina Faso. Possessing a revolutionary agenda, he aimed to eradicate corruption and redirect the country's dependence from foreign aid. His policies focused on self-sufficiency. This included land redistribution to peasants, nationalization of mineral wealth, and the push for public servants to live modest lives. Sankara issued salary cuts across the board, including for himself. The fleet of Mercedes-Benzes for high-ranking officials was done away with, and the cars were replaced by Renault 5 cars. Land and oil wealth were nationalized. While the masses celebrated, the country's elite was enraged as decades of class inequality, which had previously favored them, suddenly came into jeopardy. Burkina Faso saw incredible social progress under his leadership. He vaccinated 2.5 million children against meningitis, yellow fever, and measles in a matter of weeks. His government also launched campaigns against female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and polygamy. Generally, he promoted women's rights, including appointing women to high governmental positions. However, critics called his policies authoritarian because his regime suppressed opposition, utilizing state power to enforce its reforms. This was seen to alienate segments of the population and especially international donors. With his radical approach and disdain for economic and political dependence on the West, he was seen as an unsettling figure in domestic and international spheres. His revolutionary programs and anti-imperialist stance meant he had enemies at home and abroad. Going by his lifestyle, Sankara was the antithesis of success. Still, it is this very distinction that enabled him to become the most successful president Africa has ever seen in terms of what he accomplished for and with his people. On October 15, 1987, he was assassinated during a coup. This coup was led by his former colleague Blaise Compaoré, who assumed leadership and went on to reverse many of Sankara's policies. Allegations persist claiming that external governments were responsible for his death. Sankara was 37 when he was gunned down along with 12 other men who died. Sankara's body was riddled with more than a dozen bullets and buried in an unmarked grave. He remains one of the African continent's most admired and beloved political leaders, and his vision of Pan-African flourishing and an end to colonialism have long remained his legacy. Number 7. Muammar Gaddafi. When in 2009, the brotherly leader of the Libyan people marked his 40th year in office, few had reasons to believe he won't be around for much longer. Born in the early 1940s, Gaddafi led a revolution that overthrew King Idris, Libya's last monarch, in 1969 to establish a modern Libyan state, which he would preside over for the next 4 decades plus. A most eccentric, stylish and controversial figure, Colonel Gaddafi transformed Libya from a traditional monarchy and one of Africa's poorest states to a truly modern state with the highest human development indices ratings on the continent in terms of per capita income, life expectancy, and literacy rate and girl-child education. Like many African leaders, however, he had strong dictatorial tendencies. Press freedom and democratic structures were practically non-existent with reports of human rights abuses. However, Gaddafi's vision extended far beyond Libya. He dreamed of a United States of Africa with a gold-backed currency to liberate African economies from the stranglehold of Western financial systems. This bold move was perceived as a direct threat to the global financial order dominated by the US dollar and the euro. When the Arab Spring of 2010-2011 flowed into Libya, clashes between government and opposition forces led to a NATO intervention in favor of the latter. After months of bitter fighting, rebel forces eventually took control of Tripoli, the capital, effectively ending Gaddafi's 42-year reign. After the fall of Tripoli, Gaddafi and his family escaped the Libyan capital and fled to the city of Sirte. On October 20, 2011, as Gaddafi fled Sirte, a satellite call made from his convoy was intercepted by NATO forces, resulting in airstrikes. Colonel Gaddafi was subsequently captured by rebel forces. He was tortured and killed. Several videos related to the death were shown on television and circulated on the internet. The first shows footage of Gaddafi alive, his face and shirt bloodied, stumbling and being dragged toward an ambulance by armed militants. The video shows Gaddafi being sodomized with a bayonet. Another video shows Gaddafi, stripped to the waist, suffering from an apparent gunshot wound to the head, and in a pool of blood, together with jubilant fighters firing automatic weapons in the air. A third video, posted on YouTube, shows fighters hovering around his lifeless-looking body, posing for photographs and yanking his limp head up and down by the hair. Another video shows him being stripped naked and verbally abused by his captors. Gaddafi's brutal assassination left Libya in chaos, fractured by tribal conflicts and human trafficking. Gaddafi's dream of African unity died with him, replaced by a fractured continent still grappling with external exploitation. Number 8. Samuel Doe. Born in 1951. In 1980, Samuel Canyon Doe, a 28-year-old master sergeant, assumed power in Liberia in a blaze of glory. In a surprise nighttime attack on the executive mansion overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, Doe and his accomplices brutally murdered President William Tolbert, ending 133 years of rule by Black American settlers and their descendants known as Americo-Liberians. 10 days after President Tolbert met his brutal end, 13 of the most senior officials of the Tolbert government were stripped down to their underwear and publicly executed on a Monrovia beach. Having discarded with Tolbert, Doe became Liberia's first president of exclusive indigenous heritage. Doe allowed indigenous people into government and was popular at first, but he began to favor his own tribe, the Kran, and his popularity with other ethnic groups declined. Doe's regime was supported by the United States, which was using Liberia as its main Cold War ally in West Africa, with a communication center and broadcast facilities for the Voice of America. This position was rewarded with massive foreign assistance from the administration of President Ronald Reagan and a state visit to the White House in 1982. Furthermore, until 1985, Liberia was the largest per capita recipient of U.S. aid in sub-Saharan Africa, receiving more assistance from the U.S. from 1981 to 1985 than over the entire previous century. Doe won fraudulent elections in October 1985, and then, just a month later, an insurgent group called the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL, which was led by a former comrade, attacked Liberia in an attempt to overthrow President Doe, but they were fought back and defeated by the Liberian army. The NPFL was predominantly from the Gio and Mano tribes, and in revenge, Doe had the two tribes singled out for killings by the Liberian army. Doe survived the failed overthrow, but this tumultuous period caused domestic political calculations to change greatly. By the late 1980s, forces under Doe were committing ever greater atrocities and primarily consisted of members of his own Kran ethnic group. The period after the elections saw increased human rights abuses, corruption, and ethnic tensions, ultimately leading to the start of the First Liberian Civil War in 1989. Also, at the end of the Cold War, his previously unwavering support from the US evaporated, and as Liberia erupted into civil war, Doe was left vulnerable. The US didn't intervene to help Samuel Doe. 9 months into the conflict, on September 9, 1990, Doe was captured on a visit to the recently deployed ECOWAS monitoring group, ECOMOG, in Monrovia. Hours later, he was dead, though Liberia's civil war would continue for years. Doe's assassination was not your regular sniper takedown or firing squad assassination. It was arguably the first time that the world would watch a sitting head of state being assassinated in such a way. In his last hours, shackles were also placed around his legs, and Doe was stripped to his underwear, interrogated and humiliated on film. His ears and some of his fingers were cut off. Rebel leader Prince Johnson nonchalantly presided over the affair. After 12 hours of torture at Johnson's hands, Doe was finally murdered. His corpse had its head shaved and was exhibited naked in the streets of Monrovia with cigarette burns. The spectacle of his torture was videotaped and seen on news reports around the country. His death was a direct consequence of the US abandoning him when he was no longer useful to the US. Number 9. João Bernardo Nino Vieira. João Bernardo Nino Vieira was born on April 27, 1939 in Bissau, then part of Portuguese Guinea. He trained as an electrician. He grew to prominence as a military leader during Guinea-Bissau's War of Independence, which was fought against Portuguese colonial rule. In 1960, he joined the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, PAIGC, studying under founder Amilcar Cabral at the PAIGC school in Conakry, Guinea. Vieira's role in the party leadership grew, and his military achievements contributed greatly to the country's eventual independence in 1974. The leader of the PAIGC, Amilcar Cabral, was assassinated in 1973 and was succeeded as leader of the PAIGC by his half-brother, Luis Cabral, who subsequently became the first president of independent Guinea-Bissau. In 1978, Vieira was appointed as Prime Minister of Guinea-Bissau. By 1980, economic conditions had deteriorated significantly, which led to general dissatisfaction with the government. On November 14, 1980, Prime Minister Vieira toppled the government of Luis Cabral in a bloodless military coup. Thus began Vieira's first presidency, lasting until 1999. Initially, he pursued moderate socialist policies. However, in order to secure international aid and investment, he shifted towards economic liberalism. His leadership period was spoiled by corruption, economic mismanagement, and an inability to prevent ethnic struggles within the country. During the late 1990s, the political situation worsened in the country, leading to the Guinea-Bissau Civil War in 1998. The military was dissatisfied with Vieira's leadership, alleging him of favoritism and mishandling the economy. The country's infrastructure was severely damaged during the Civil War, and Vieira was ousted in a coup in 1999. Vieira lived in Portugal for several years after he was exiled. However, Guinea-Bissau's unstable landscape beckoned him to return in 2005, where he participated in the presidential elections and won. This was a rare instance where an African president was able to regain presidency after it was taken from him. However, Vieira's second term in office was just as problematic. The political instability and military tensions persisted. In March 2009, Vieira was assassinated by members of the military who were retaliating to the killing of the army chief of staff. A doctor who was involved in Vieira's autopsy was quoted as saying that Vieira was savagely beaten before being finished off with several bullets. He was hit by several bullets in the thorax and face, and his body showed the marks of violent blows. Number 10. Melchior Ndadaye. Melchior Ndadaye was an intellectual and politician who later became the first ever democratically elected president of the African nation of Burundi. Prior to this, Burundi was under military rule, with presidents who rose to power through military coups and instigated the genocide of the Hutu people. The Hutu and Tutsi were the two main ethnic groups in Burundi. The Tutsi group was the more influential and consolidated power. As a result, many Hutu people fled the country due to the ongoing genocide, including a young Ndadaye in 1972. He finished his studies in Rwanda and became a university lecturer. Once he became involved in politics, he helped found the Socialist Burundi Workers' Party in 1979. He later went on to become its leader. He returned to Burundi in 1983 and in 1986 founded the Front for Democracy, Frodebu Party. Such was his popularity that in the June 1993 elections, he won the presidency by a landslide of almost 66% of the votes. His win marked a turning point in the nation's history, which had been under military rule for 26 years. He tried to effect changes in the structures of power distribution and bring about reconciliation between the divided ethnic groups. This did not rub everyone the right way, especially the Tutsi people who were used to being in power. On October 21, 1993, after a mere 3 months of Ndadaye being in power, he was assassinated in a military coup, led by the Tutsi-dominated military who saw a threat in his policies. His assassination was brutal as during the coup, Ndadaye was captured and taken to a military camp, where he was taken to a room where 10 junior officers specifically assigned to the task killed him. A coroner's report later found that Ndadaye was held by a cord around his neck, while the soldiers bayoneted him 14 times. Half of the wounds penetrated his thorax, and the subsequent bleeding filled up his lungs, killing him. The soldiers then dug a mass grave in the center of the camp, where they buried Ndadaye and other top officials that were also killed. After several hours, the soldiers realized that international opinion would strongly disapprove of such treatment of the bodies, so they exhumed them and allowed family members to collect them. What followed were mass protests and resistance, to such an extent that Ndadaye's death sparked a civil war in Burundi between the Hutus and Tutsis, which lasted until 2005. The military coup failed and the new president of Burundi was the one who instituted October 21st as a national holiday, in solemn remembrance of Ndadaye and all that he stood for. This day therefore serves as an inspiration to many to stand up for democracy and unity and to resist tyranny. Number 11. Eduardo Monal. Eduardo Shivambo Mondlane was a freedom fighter who served as the founding president of the Mozambican Liberation Front, Frelimo, from 1962, the year it was founded, until his assassination in 1969. Eduardo Mondlane was born on June 20, 1920, in the Gaza district of southern Mozambique, which at the time was under the colonial rule of the Portuguese. He worked as a shepherd until he was around 12 years old. Mondlane attended a number of mission primary schools before obtaining a scholarship to attend secondary school in South Africa. He was admitted into Wits University in Johannesburg, but was expelled for his nationalistic views which came into conflict with the recently adopted apartheid system. He eventually obtained a degree in sociology and anthropology from Oberlin College in the USA, and then completed a PhD in sociology at Northwestern University. In the early 1960s, Mondlane left the United States for Tanzania and helped form Mozambican Liberation Front, Frelimo, a socialist pro-independence movement made up of exiled Mozambican nationalists, and he became the first president of the organization. With the backing of the Soviet Union and many African nations, Frelimo launched a guerrilla war in 1964 against the colonial Portuguese government in an attempt to win Mozambique's independence. Mondlane led Frelimo until 1969 when he was killed by a bomb which had been disguised as a notebook sent to him by unknown assassins. In 1969, a book containing a bomb was sent to Mondlane at the Frelimo headquarters in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. It exploded when he opened the package, killing him. No one has ever been brought to book for his murder, and while inside the movement, blame has always been leveled at the Portuguese, most historians acknowledge that Mondlane was murdered by his own. Frelimo continued to fight for independence after Mondlane's death, and by the early 1970s, it controlled central and northern Mozambique, despite being outnumbered by the Portuguese military. In 1974, following a military coup in Lisbon, Portuguese colonial policy dramatically changed, and on June 25, 1975, Frelimo was given control of Mozambique, and the country gained its independence.